Bring in William Lee. He's the Milken Institute's chief economist. He's going to help us make sense of some of these numbers. William, thanks so much for joining us. We heard some of the export figures. They're growing faster in June than expected. Which sectors in particular are doing the best in terms of exports?
Well, China has really benefited a lot from the huge boom in stay-at-home goods that it's exporting, the electronics, the kind of stuff that people need to use at home when they're working from home. And the lockdown now has started to ease up a bit in the rest of the world. And what we expect going forward is that the demand for these lockdown, shutdown kind of goods will ease off. China has actually been surprising in how well it's kept its exports up, considering the port in Shenzhen had been shut down because of COVID. So I think that it's a statement about how strong the export sector is in China to be able to reallocate resources in the way that it did.
Things don't just have to come out of China, they have to come into other places. I know here in the U.S. there's lots of backup. People are still having trouble getting lots of things that are being imported, many of them from China. How has that affected China's economic numbers, if at all?
Yeah, the imports coming into China are really interesting. The surge in imports that we've seen is mainly because of the high value of commodity prices. What you see, the real volume of imports actually has slowed down quite a bit. And one of the things that China has to do is to contain the price increases. So we saw a lot recently has been the factory price going up about 9%, but retail prices only gone up by 1.5%. So I think that's a statement again about how well China has contained the supply side shocks and price increases and has helped to support its export growth by containing these price increases.
Can China continue to sustain this sort of level of growth, in your opinion?
Roee, that's a great question, because I think one of the statements that the government has made, both implicitly and explicitly, is they're worried about growth going forward. Xi Jinping's dual circulation strategy depends critically on the domestic economy remaining strong, but the private domestic consumption really has not been all that strong because of the uncertainty caused by COVID, and because a lot of the factories that have opened up have mainly been in manufacturing. The retail services side has really started to lag behind. I think the central bank lowering its RRR requirements is one sign that the government is putting in insurance policies to ensure that the domestic economy stays strong.
And what should we expect when GDP results are released later this week?
I think this week we're still going to see some good results, because that surge in exports we saw in the first half of the year is going to help China. Going forward, the concern is that we'll see a slowdown so that the annual average for GDP may hit below 8%. And that's a bit concerning because, again, the primary mandate by Xi Jinping is to make sure that domestic demand and employment are strong. And that's a challenge to the policymakers going forward.
I know you're not here as a medical expert, but we are obviously in an era of COVID. And while China has handled COVID in its way, other countries now are dealing, of course, with the Delta variant. We can expect more restrictions, shutdowns in various places. China's economy is not an island on this globe. It's connected to the global economy. What sort of impacts do you think the global pandemic may have on China's domestic economy?
As I mentioned earlier, the port of Shenzhen was shut down because of the outbreak of COVID. We are seeing more and more spots around the world, including China, where we have an outbreak right now taking place. China has had a limited amount of outbreaks to the point where they really don't know whether it's the Delta version of the virus or not. But I think going forward, the challenge will be to get more people vaccinated. And people are still questioning the efficacy of the Chinese vaccine, but the key is it's been very successful in keeping people out of hospitals. And that's really the mandate of every vaccine right now, is to keep people out of hospitals, keep them alive, and keep the economy going.
I also want to ask you lastly, we're 6 months into the Biden administration. China had a very confrontational relationship, you could argue, with Donald Trump. How has that changed with Joe Biden, and how has that affected the economy?
I think a lot of people are surprised to be reminded that the Democrats have been much more tough on China than the Republicans have been. The Democrats have always harped about labor standards, have always harped about human rights in Shenzhen. So a lot of these topics that Donald Trump talked about have been amplified even more so in the Biden administration. And I think going forward, the challenge will be to get the talks going again so that we can have multilateral talks among ASEAN, among Asian partners, so that the role for China will be clear-cut, because China, after all, is still the second largest economy in the world, and it has to be treated as such. And China itself has to remember that it cannot itself an emerging market anymore. It really is among the big boys now, and it should take its place among the big boys as a second largest economy.
William Lee, Milken Institute, thank you for your insight.